Now it says we're live. Let's see if we actually are live.
Yeah, looks like it's starting up.
Yes, nice. Okay, cool. Perfect. I'm just gonna edit some information on this category on page. Software game development. It's funny how like these streaming services don't have all of the they don't have like all of like the categories, so sometimes you have to like go in there and edit them yourself.
Yeah, I'm sure every platform is pretty different, especially like Twitter adding streaming, things like that, and trying to keep it in sync across all of them. It'd be kind of
Mm-hmm.
interesting product to work on, like Restream and different tools like that.
Nice. All right, cool. So it looks like it's streaming. We're good to go. We've wasted enough time, so let's just jump into it. Actually, I'm going to try to see if we can actually figure out chat. Okay, there we go. We've got chat showing up there. I don't know if it shows. I don't think it'll show on the stream, but at least it will. Nice. Let's see if this changes. All right. Cool. All right. So why don't we get started just with you sharing, not sharing, well, maybe. For people who don't know you, I'm gonna record this and I'll probably upload it to the YouTube channel long term as well, so people might come back and watch this. If you wanted to just say a little something about you, I will. Connor, before you get started, Connor is a buddy of mine. Has been for like a year and a half. Um, just because we decided to be friends on the internet, we just followed each other on Twitter, and then we started chatting, and then next thing you know, we're going on all day fast while my wife has surgery, and now she holds a grudge against you. So Connor is a good buddy. Sup, Emmett. Connor's a good buddy, and wanted to come on here and pair with me. He does a little bit of game development and also does like some Elixir and functional programming. So I think he will be an awesome guest as we jump through some of this.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate you
Anything
having
else
me
you would like
on.
to add?
Just share, I'm a software developer at Knox. So yeah, working in Elixir, and then on the side, really enjoy
Mm-hmm.
playing around with game development and tinkering with Godot, which is a popular open source engine, and then the Playdate, which is usually written in Lua. So it's been fun to kind of explore different languages and ideas through game development. So yeah, it's been fun
Good.
learning a little
Okay.
bit about Gleam and following your devlogs.
Awesome. Well, I am excited to have you on because you actually have experience with with game development in some, at least in some shape, and I have none. So maybe you can bring in some experience in my blind fumbling that I've been doing. But to kick things off, I think what we can get started with here, the answer, Emmett, on the kids' cabin is that it is mostly done construction-wise. This kids' cabin in the backyard that I'm building, Connor, that you've probably seen. I'm currently putting in the steps that will go around like the front patio thing and the deck in the back. And then after that's done, I've just got to do doors, and then it's ready to get like painted and trimmed out and stuff. But
And then you
it's
got
making
to edit your
progress. It's
YouTube
very cold
videos.
and wet. Yeah, yeah. I've got to finish more of those YouTube videos. I got a ton of stuff recorded, but I just haven't put anything out yet. Because Allie says that she's going to post one of my most embarrassing like photos from elementary school if I don't finish the videos. So I'm very motivated to finish those. Um, anyway, I think what we can do here is start with this first one, which you took a look over the code base and the project kind of like yesterday and this morning, and you had some questions, and I will be happy to answer those. I think there's some pretty good questions.
Yeah, definitely. The main question, which I think you talked a little bit in different parts of your devlogs about, is why did you choose the stack that you went with? Why Gleam? Why Lustre? And what are kind of the unique aspects of those technologies that work well with the type of game that you're building?
Yes. Okay. So this is a great question. Um, with a probably a little more disappointing answer in some cases. So the reason I picked Gleam is because I just love functional languages and I love typed languages. And Gleam is like it's got like some influences, so it like compiles to Erlang, which is like a really great runtime. I did Elixir for a while, and like not one of the issues, because Elixir is fantastic even without this, but like one thing that I love are types, and Elixir is now starting to get types, but did not back a few years ago when I was wanting to do that. But also like the syntax fits really close with Elm, which is also like just like an OCaml inspired language, and like, the whole family of languages. I just really like the syntax and formatting for the code. Um, so the main reason is like Gleam looked familiar, even though I've never used it, and had a lot of like the functional qualities, like immutable data structures, piping types, all this kind of stuff that like fits well in this like functional box that I really like. And I think like that's functional programming is just like good for games, despite like what a lot of people my assumption is like a lot of people think like object oriented programming is really good for games, and I might run into some of that probably at some point when I start creating more objects inside of a game in the game. um, but I think functional programming will be really good for that, because you can model, you basically, like, to me what a game engine is like you've got data models and you're just piping those data models through like checks and transformations and updates, which is like what functional programming is like really great at. Is like taking data and piping it through a bunch of transformations that are conditional or not, and then outputting new data on the other end in a way that is like safe and doesn't mutate any underlying state. Like that immutable part I think is very valuable, because like updates are happening like constantly to your data structure in a game loop, and I think the immutability part of it will save a whole class of things from ever happening, because you don't get in like these weird states that like can spiral. I think spiral really quickly too, because like your game loop is hopefully 60 frames per second, which means like you as a human don't really have time to react like you would maybe in like a browser rendering situation of like a single page load. It's a lot easier to debug mutated state, but like in a constant looping situation, like your state gets out of whack and gets out of whack fast, and like there's no recovering it. And debugging it just requires you to like deconstruct the loop a lot of times. Um, so I think immutable that'll save me from like a lot of those kind of bugs. So that's why Gleam, and then why I layered Lustre on top of that is I want to use Canvas to render the game in the browser, because I'm learning a lot of new things, but like learning how to like render in bare metal on like a operating system is not one of them that I want to bother with. So like Canvas in the browser is a very familiar API, and Gleam, as I mentioned, compiles to Erlang, but it also compiles to JavaScript if you want it to. So I can have a server side of the application that manages like saving game state, long term, any type of like network request requirements can be handled server side using Erlang, back to back end, and then anything that's just like managing like the game loop and rendering can be handled by like a JavaScript compiled client, which means I have full access to browser APIs. I have full access to like, if I want to pull in JavaScript libraries at some point, I can. I don't have to. I'm not currently doing that, and kind of like the goal of this project is to build everything from scratch anyway. So I might not, but I can. But at a very minimum, using foreign function interfaces, I can like dip into JavaScript and pull out the things that I want to work with. And Luster, I explained this in like my first game devlog on like this game loop, uh, is in a game loop, your loop is time dependent, which means like it's not being triggered, updates are not triggered based on like things happening in the game, like a user clicking a button or anything. Users are constantly creating events, but those events aren't triggering updates. Updates are happening on a time-based loop. So like there needs to be a way to have like these events get sent somewhere that are saved, that the loop, the update loop, can pull those events from that queue. So I'm using Luster specifically because Luster already has that. It has like the three big pieces already built into it. It's what's called a MVU framework, model view update. Model is your state, so my game state, and like model view. The view is just like what's rendered to the browser, which is like very easy so far at this point, which is just like a canvas element. But like as I add other things to it, like I've got like a debugger in there currently. All of this is handled by like the current model. The view is derivative of the model. So if the model changes, the view changes. And then update, which is like basically what we're talking about. It's this like very side effect free event stream that allows you to pass events that happen in your view or during your update process. You can pass these events into like already a queue type system without me having to build. Like there's like words that I'm like, this sounds very similar to like an event bus and like an event driven type architecture. And I don't have to build that from scratch because this kind of handles it already. There are these messages hold data, and I can do whatever I want with those messages. And we'll be diving into some of that today as we start working on some of these, because a number of these things like turn and all of that will require us sending out those events. But that's like the main reasons I'm using Gleam and Luster, is like functional immutability. Um, and Gleam has like a syntax that I'm familiar with, even though I've not used it before. So it's really nice. And then Luster model view update framework saves me from having to like rewrite all the event type frameworking from scratch.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think in the context of the project and what you're trying to learn, you get a lot of really good benefits. The kind of immutability, the rigor that you have with the way the messages are passed, and you're able to, just very easily handle them, and you know exactly what state you're going to be in at
Mm-hmm.
what time. Yeah, it's been interesting
Yep.
to check out. A little turned off by the templating syntax right off the bat, but I mean, you're doing most of the stuff in the
Yeah,
canvas,
it's
so
not. Thankfully, I am not like. There are some people who will like live and die by the fact that like um, the templating syntax is like beautiful. Like it's just function calls. But like
true.
I
Yeah,
don't have like a strong opinion either way. Um, like I don't mind it. I write React every day, so like React is way faster and easier to use. Thankfully, I do not have to use a bunch of it because everything is happening inside of Canvas at the moment. Um, so it's just like put a canvas on the screen, make sure it's the right width and height, and that's it for now. So I'm not. Thankfully, like the whole game's not built based on like writing templating language. But yeah,
for sure.
that is a very common thing. It's like, wow, this is really ugly. It doesn't look anything like HTML. And some people are like, wow, it's beautiful. It doesn't look like anything like HTML.
Definitely polarizing, yeah. And related
Yes,
to the
for sure.
architecture, I was wondering what your thoughts are on kind of like client versus server interactions, and kind of
Right.
ties into what your plans are later on with gameplay. Is it going to be multiplayer? Are there concerns around cheating if too much logic is on the front end? I was
Right.
curious, yeah, what your thoughts are there.
So the two things that I would say are like, one, I'm never building multiplayer because, oh my goodness, like no thanks. That's like a game engine is enough. We don't have to worry about doing multiplayer on top of that. And then two, like cheating, I think the answer is like there are some solutions to that. Um, if I get to a point where I'm like that concerned about people cheating, um, and trying to like hack the system, there's some things that I've started reading on about like encrypted events to where like people like you have a way of encrypting things within your system to where like people can't just do whatever they want. But at the same time, like it's also an open source project. So like if people really want to get in there and cheat on this thing, they absolutely can. As far as like the future of this project and how that like is influencing this, like I'm building this to learn, but as I'm building it, like I'm really enjoying the game that I'm coming up with. So I also foresee at some point getting to a point on this game engine where I'm like, I personally cannot build everything that I want this game to do. And at some point, I'll just be like, this is a good stopping point for this version of the game. And eventually, like, I will probably like stop, tie a bow on everything and be like, this is playable. Here you go. It's in the wild. There's an open source project for if you want to like use it as a reference and be able to play it and learn from it. And then probably take this into like a full game engine of some sort and make a full game that is like able to be sold and played for real. Just because like I plan on investing a lot into like the story and like the art, and I'm really enjoying that part of the process as well. And I think I'll get to a point where I just want to keep going with that. As far as like why how I've got things broken up at the moment, so like if we look into this project, I've got a server folder and I've got a client folder here. Literally everything's in the client right now, because everything that I'm doing is currently backed by like the need to compile to JavaScript. The way I'm picturing things is like the client is the game engine. It's where the like the update loops are happening, and the way I'm thinking of the server is it's just like a syncing engine where save points can get pushed off to the server, whether I want to do like automated save points, save states, whatever, like however I want to handle that. I think Erlang would be really good engine for being able to like send constant save data in the background without it like overloading the system or be costing that much. Just with the way Erlang handles um, like servers and all of that. Um, but I really just see the server as just like a sync layer to say like this is the current state of the world if they leave and come back. But as far as like active gameplay and updates, like all of that's going to live in the client, so that there's no lag or delay to get from like client to server. And if somebody like loses connection to the server, they could still play. And I've just got to figure out like how that works eventually. But right now, like we don't even have units on a map, so like that's more of just like general shapes of how I'm thinking of the future.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense thinking about the project long term and, saving the level you're on, or maybe you have like a map editor or something in the future. You have that option for
Yeah,
persistence.
I saw you mention something like that, and that sounded like super. That sounded super interesting. Um, just in terms of like being able to do a map editor, that's something that I want to get into because currently what I'm doing is like I've got this is a map. It's like a giant dictionary of coordinates and tiles, which the what I'm thinking of doing, which it's a lot, and I had to like update it the other day, and thankfully ChatGPT to the rescue. Like I was just like, hey, put like a bunch more rows and columns at like random coordinate, like random elevations, and that saved a lot of time. But like manually editing this sounds like a nightmare. Uh, but the program that I'm using to do all the pixel artwork is this. Uh, let's see, color tile test tiles. So this is like my like tile sprite for like the test section. There is a way that you can script. So you get these scripts, and you can write scripts to take a file and convert it. So what I'm thinking is like I think at some point, once I get past, like, once I get a full working situation and I'm starting to, like, really put out assets and maps and all of that, I think what would be super interesting is to be able to say, like, um, be able to, like, code a script that takes a map that I've built inside of this, program, it's called Sprite, and be able to just, like, output the this dictionary that I have here, um, in some form. I'm not sure how that would work, but I need some way of being able to edit these things that is not manually adding each tile in a map, because I think some maps are going to be rather large. Because this one, even after building this one, I'm like, I thought this was a lot of tiles, but when you see it visually, you're like, oh, this actually isn't. This actually isn't that many. Um, but
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like you're going to lean more towards kind of handcrafted maps and scenarios and things like that. Versus if you're like procedurally generating levels, then it's not a big
right,
deal to do it in
right, it
code.
doesn't
But
matter
yeah,
as much. Yeah, I
and
think I'd have a couple. Like the way I'm thinking about it is like there will be story maps, which will all be very custom and fine tuned to the story needs for that battle. And then we will have like random encounters as well, because at some point you'll need to like grind and get your characters levels up, and you can't have like a story battle for every time that that needs to happen. So there will, I think there will be at some days like some procedural system for building up maps, but there will be enough custom ones as well that will need some way to handle that.
yeah, definitely cool ideas to explore.
Cool.
Sweet
Any
man.
other
Yeah, don't want
questions?
to sidetrack you too much,
No, not a
chatting
problem.
about the
Like
whole
it was just
architecture,
more of
but
like,
yeah.
I mean, honestly, like I can get all this stuff done on my own. I was really curious to see like what your thoughts. One other question that you mentioned that was like why I was doing something a certain way. Let's see
Mhm.
which one it is.
Yeah, why the cursor is getting
The knit.
rendered.
Why check? Yeah, why? Okay, so let's go to the code, and I would love to hear your feedback on like ways that you think it like could be better.
Yeah, part of this
Um,
as well is I've been kind of looking between Gleam and Elixir because some things I'm
mhm,
like one of the things that you're talking about is, maybe you think that an object-oriented approach would work better, which is definitely a common approach, right? We're able to model your kind of parent classes for like units and you have all that shared functionality. One idea is you could have like a behavior do that in Elixir and then all of the different units implement those same methods. And I was looking up and I was like,
mhm.
oh, behaviors and
Yes,
protocols
yes.
and things like that, those don't exist in Gleam, but
No,
you
they
kind of get
don't.
some of
They
that with
don't.
the typing.
Yeah, no, they're like that's one thing that I'm starting to run into is that there is not. Um, let's make sure I actually get the right URL to start rendering the game. All right, so this is our game. Um, we can move the cursor around, and the map moves around with it. Um, what you are referring to is in the game engine. Um, let's see. There's update loop. Move cursor. Nope. This is going to be in the render. Do do do. Which is handled. That's actually happening in the client. All right, so render. There we go. Is it? Yeah, there we go. All right. So basically, like what we're doing is saying like inside the render function for the cursor, um, it's saying like is the current position that's being passed into this render function where the cursor actually is. If it's not, don't render it, and if it is, render it. Um, so in the client, it's allowing me to. I guess the way that I'm thinking about it is like I'd have to run that check based on my data model. If we look at our game engine, um, we have our game state, and our cursor lives as like a type on our game state. And our cursor is defined as a position, a sprite sheet, and an animation, which I've got with the new. Anyway, I'm not gonna get sidetracked. All right, so we've got position, sprite sheet, animation, and the position lives inside of cursor. The way that we are doing our like render is that in our client file, I'm looping through each tile because like render order matters when you're rendering to canvas, especially like a 3D scene in 2D. You have to render in order from like top. Actually, I've got the perfect visual for this that I just made. All right, render loop. All right, this is the visual. If you don't render from like this back row to the front row and from the top to the bottom, so like you can see here, it's rendered out of order. The layering is all wrong. So I'm rendering. Like my render loop is basically looping through each tile of the map that exists, and from that each tile function, I'm now rendering like, okay, well, what is happening at this tile's coordinates? And then here's like the tile information. The first thing that we do is render the tile because that tile always has to go first, and because everything else is going on top of it. And then currently all I have is like the render, the base, which is like the little, let's go. Well, let me get this over to the right screen. There we go. Which this is a funny little bug that I've got to add a paused state for. I'll explain at another time. But this little gold part right here is the base. This is like the little pointer. They're split into different layers because this will go under any unit or anything that's on this tile, and this cursor part has to go like over. So like already like that's another reason to split these out, and then like units and everything will be rendered between them. So basically like I'm rendering each tile and I've got a coordinate. So I guess what I'm thinking about it is like I've got to check to see if the cursor exists at this coordinate, and I've just got them bundled into the render because otherwise it's like it's like kind of built into the whole point of like rendering this. And I just felt like it would make the code uglier if I brought it outside of here. Like technically, yes, render base could be more, I guess, more clean. The function itself, but I kind of like the call site being cleaner, like here, than in putting some of that complexity inside the function itself.
I think that makes more sense
that's
now.
like why.
Yeah, what I was
happening that
forgetting
way. I didn't know
was
if you had any
the
other
render order
ideas.
that you needed to have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
the kind of smell that I had was that you're checking for it on every tile. So it makes sense, kind of the current
Mm-hmm.
approach. The next thought that comes to mind is like, what happens when you're rendering a bunch of units or pickups or things like that on different tiles? And maybe as you get further in the implementation, there is a different way to restructure that, where
Mm-hmm.
instead of checking for each tile, do I need to render X? Do I need to render Y? Maybe you have some method or something in the state that says, okay, get me all the things that I need to render for this specific tile, and then order those based
Mm-hmm.
on the Z index or whatever criteria you have for doing that.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay, so it's funny you should mention that because that's like one of the things. All right, so let me pull this up. That's like one of the things that I'm thinking about for today, which is, all right, terms. Here we go. All right. So like I like obviously don't have a ton of time to write game engine code at a computer sitting down. I've got 3 small kids. So I have a bunch of Notion docs with like in progress thoughts on code and stuff. So this is like as we're getting into units, I'm thinking along those paths in terms of like uh, different data structures for like different needs. So like for instance, all of this is like related to units, but there's like three different data structures that I'm like, oh, I kind of need all of these for different use cases. Your initiative list is like, okay, well, what order do all the units turns need to be in, and how do I keep track of that throughout the whole battle? And how do people get like pulled out of it when it's their turn and slotted back into it? Like, how do people get rearranged when they get status effects? Like, that all needs to be managed inside of this. What we also have is like, okay, well, like, I also need to know like if somebody's like trying to cast a spell on coordinate, like one, like x, y, two, like what exists at that coordinate. So if I have a dictionary of a coordinate and a string, which would be like the unit ID, and that would allow me to like, we'll look up that unit inside of like this dictionary of units. So like they're both like, I've got a coordinate, the coordinate pulls the unit ID, then I use the unit ID to pull like the actual unit data. The reason I like to think about it this way is like you want to have a single source of truth for like your data for a unit, because like one thing is like, well, now you're having to do like multiple lookups. Like why not manage all of your units in like one data structure, like location map? But then the problem is like, well, like what if I need to um like what if, so in my initiative list I pluck the top, the next unit out of here and it's a unit ID. Like how do I find, like how do I get that unit? I would need to like loop through something like this, most likely, unless I like also stored the coordinate data. But then it's like, well, what happens? What happens if like during one of the previous turns, like an attack moves a unit's, like does a knockback effect and pushes the unit to a new tile? You don't want to. I don't want to have too many sources of truth for a single piece of data in full data structure. So I'm thinking, I'm honestly like thinking of these kind of like database tables in some sense, where it's like, well, they're just kind of like foreign keys, and they just have like a different um, use for like what their lookup is. I'm not sure if this is the right approach, but like I like what you said, because then I'm thinking like, well, could location map, which currently is just like a coordinate and a string,
Yeah.
like could this morph into like, okay, well, it's a coordinate, and then instead of just a string that's always a unit, could it be like a data structure that tells me like this is a unit, this is a cursor, this is an item or whatever, so that I know where to go look up the source of truth, if I need to get more data on it, for like for the instance of the cursor. So it's like, okay, I'm looping through tiles, and instead of doing like a conditional check for the cursor, like I just check, but then I guess I'm checking the location map. It's like the same thing, I guess. It's like, um,
In a way,
but
but
like,
for
but
every
not have,
tile,
in a
you
way,
would
it's like,
go.
right, every tile, check this location map and get all entities
Mhm.
that exist at this location, and then render them based on like them having like a Z index of some kind.
I
I
think
like
that
that.
makes a lot of sense. Like, I think you definitely need the unit map, or even maybe more broadly, an entity map, which is the list of
Hmm.
units and pickups and things that you're going to have on the map at that current time. But then, yeah, based on
Hmm.
what data you need to access, I think it makes a lot of sense to pre-compute that. It's kind of like an
Hmm.
index for locations, for example. So maybe that's a
Yeah, I
dictionary
like that.
of
I
a
like that.
coordinate to a list of
Right,
IDs. And same with like
right.
initiative lists
And so
makes a lot of
like,
sense.
let's see here. So if we go to our cursor, the way I guess we would think about it is like cursor then would no longer have a position, because like position data is all managed. Like then like we're not mixing concerns, I guess, because like cursor would no longer be concerned with like where it's at. It's just like this is how you are rendering it. Like there's a sprite sheet and there's an animation, and like the like how you know where to render the cursor is because it lives in some sort of like entity dictionary, and the coordinate is like just like a given part of when you're like doing the render loop. You already know the coordinate for it anyway.
I
Okay,
think that makes sense.
so what we can do here is we'll call this an entity map. We'll do a dictionary record and entity. This is where things get interesting in one sense, because this is very similar to the issue that you mentioned, which was there are. I'll show you. Actually show you a perfect example of this that I had to like start thinking through to think it in Gleam terms. So inside of the turn type that I started thinking about, a turn has like this data, but what I was originally doing was like forget turn step. Like this was the turn type, and each of them had like some custom data on it, but there was no way to like do like a generic per se, like what we were thinking about doing, where it's like, okay, well, like, all of them have this data, and then some of them have this data, and having them be like in TypeScript be like at the same level, basically. So like you have to nest types in that case. So like if you have generic data that applies across all of them, there's no like extending of the type. You just have to nest your variants, I guess is the way of phrasing it. So in this case, it's like these are all the things that like every single turn needs, quote unquote, which will probably change now. Well, actually, no, this will stay. That's different. But like all of them have this stuff that's part of every single turn. But depending on what step it's on, there's different sub data and different things that need to happen. So I think that will be like very similar to what we'll start needing to do here. So we would have an entity .gleam, which will have a new pub type called entity. And each entity will have like a kind or a type. I'm trying to remember if the type is allowed as a key. I think I do it somewhere else. Let's see. Nope. I think I do. I must find. Nope. Don't even do that. I must have just done it in Notion. Let's go with kind. I really like kind in these cases, so you don't get confused when there's like type systems. And then this would need to then be like oh well, actually, yeah. So I think the way I would think about it is like entity kind, and then I would call this like reference ID. Like I think all of them. Maybe not. Okay, so let's pretend everything has a reference ID, which camel case is not happy doing syntax, which is why it's getting mad at me. And then like our entity kind type would be entity unit entity maybe item entity, something like that, where there are like different entity types, and that way if you needed to like, let's say we have like a public function that is find, and you would pass pass in the entity. We would do a switch statement on the passed in entity, and basically like if the case is cursor entity, like return something here, which means we would also need to pass in like our game state. Our game state holds everything. So it would be something like this, where it's like, okay, well, if it's the cursor type, then we know that we can just pass back game state cursor.
Yeah, I think having some, helper methods to make it easier to grab entities from the entity map, or, find what you're looking for as those kind of use cases pop up, you can add those.
Yes. I was writing JavaScript syntax.
Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting.
He's not very happy. But yeah, like it would be something more like this. That way, like we've got just like a single data structure that then allows us, and then what that is like, okay, well, if it's a unit, which I guess actually now that I'm thinking about it, we probably don't need all of that, because we could just do it this way, and then do it this way. And like we could always add more information to these. And this way we would be able to do it like this, and say dict.get game state. We would have like our unit map here, and we pass the ID there. So yeah, it would be more this shape of things. Yeah, I like that. I think that's probably the best approach, because then we're not, then our well, basically what would happen here is for each tile coordinate, we could probably go ahead and render the tile, but we could just get like, literally this would be like entities equals game state entity map get chords, and this we would not have a list of things, and we could say list map or for each, yes, because we don't really care what comes back, which is just each, and we would have them like function that takes the entity and has like that. Okay, I like this actually, because then like maybe we could build some sort of like it's like not only would you have like a find, you could also do like a render function as well, and you'd probably be able to say like instead of like a z index, you could do z index. Yeah, you could do z index, because like lists are hard to like, I don't know, like that's where like data structure is interesting. Is like you could just loop through each and like reorder based on like some z index property, or you could just like make sure that when your entity map gets updated, you're always putting things into the data structure in the z index order that you want them to be rendered into. So
that might make more sense, because you are rendering a lot more than you're updating those items. I think it may still make sense to have entity map be a dictionary or just like a list of all the entities, and then also have the separate location map. But kind of depends on how you're needing to access them.
Say
Because
more.
I think right now entity map is a dictionary of coordinates
Hmm.
to
Entities,
entities.
correct.
I think you might want still that to be location map, and then entity map or entity list, just be the full list.
Okay. So you're saying like, okay, you're saying an entity list is just a way.
Everything that's on the map at a given point,
Mm-hmm,
and then
mm-hmm.
you just have the full list. So if you need to iterate over that to do different things, you can do that without having to dive into each coordinate of the location map.
Like, tell me if this makes sense to you. I think you would probably still want it to be uh, like a dictionary. But the idea being, okay, so this is, okay, location map would actually be cord, but then the entity map would be like the reference string as the key. Um, there's still, except I don't know if I want. So like one of these needs to be the true, one of these needs to be like, this would be like, this would still be, this would probably be like a list of string or something like this. Or I want to call something like that, I'd be very, very specific with my types. This might make a little more sense. Because that's kind of what I'm referring a string to be, is like the entity reference. And then this would be a little more easily read. So okay, so that location map, if we're searching by coordinate, and it only holds the reference because we still want to have like a single source of truth for like all the data that the entity actually holds. And entities can be
Yeah, I think that
anything.
makes a lot of sense.
And then as we are actually here looping through each of these entities, uh, entity, this is gonna, I can tell already that the more I type this, the less I'm gonna know how to spell entity. This is 100% one of those,
For sure. One of
one of
those
those
words that the
words.
more you look
Okay,
at it, you're like, is that
here
really
we go.
right?
All right, list each entity reference, and then I will want, this is like some of my favorite ways to code, honestly, is like, okay, we're literally working on the APIs at this point. Like, how do we want to use this? Not actually how it's going to work underneath. And I think I want, basically, we want to do like entity reader.
Mm-hmm.
Something, we could do something like this, or honestly, like what we could also like just straight up do is have basically, it could, I kind of like it, the idea of it being like a single one, but like, and like a list that's looping through it. But like we could also just like make a function that like pulled the loop into the render as well, if we wanted to do that. Do that well. But, like, yeah, all this would move inside of this render function because we would just do some pattern matching on the like reference type. And be able to say, or like
Yeah.
we would use, you would use the ref to pluck something from our entity map, and then we could basically just pattern match on like, okay, well, what kind of entity is it, what's the data on this entity, and like how we render it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you might need to pass in like coordinates and things like that, but then each individual entity can handle rendering. You might need to
Oh,
include game state or make it
good
accessible
point.
so that it can like get the frame that it's on currently if it's animating or doing things like that. But yeah, I think
Yeah,
it
well, shoot,
seems like
we'll need all of this: context, game state, chords. Yeah, it'll need all of this information.
how much of that
So
is already on game state, or would it make sense to include on game state?
think we can get away with this minimal amount right here.
Yeah.
Because like this is the entity which is now handled by ref. Context is like actually rendered to our canvas context. Chords we got up there, and then like camera and scale is all wrapped up in game state, so we don't have to pass those individually to this like higher level function that can be pulled down a layer to where we like pluck all that out. Okay, I like this. I like that. And I thought about this for a little bit too, where there's a world where like the more I build some of these rendering bits and pieces, that I come up with like a render. Like I've started thinking about this with like animations as well, where there's basically only there's animations in this game, perpetual animations, which I started kind of like already thinking through that here inside this like Notion doc. There's like a perpetual animation which goes on forever. There's an amount of time that is lapsed, and then there's a cycle which is like, well, how long in each loop of the animation. So like that's how you calculate progress. Is like, okay, based on the time elapsed, what's the remainder after like applying the cycle, and like that's your like progress through this animation. And then the other type of animation is like I forget what I named it in my head at this point. It's like a one-off animation where it's like there is a ending state for that animation. So instead of like cycle, it would be like elapsed duration. And like I would be able to create some like more generalized functions based out of that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You know, you do like an attack animation.
I really like this. Oh, this is nice. This is really nice because now I'm not putting that like if check inside of like the cursor logic. I'm not even putting like location logic inside of cursor anymore. All location logic exists separate from all of these entities. This is really nice. Okay, so I don't know if we'll need this to be public. We're not worried about it. Also, I think you can do this. Let's see if it yells at me. Okay, cool. So these are like, I love a good type alias that's literally just there as like documentation. Okay, so the next thing that I will need to do is to rewrite all cursor rendering to work this way. Cool. Alrighty. Well, I think that's probably about, since we had such a false start on getting things working, this will not need to be the only time that we pair, because that was super helpful. We did none of the stuff, but we are very prepared to do the stuff now.
To add more stuff.
That was super helpful. Yeah. No, I like that. This is like kind of the hope that I had with these kind of things, was like, okay, I already know what I want to be doing with these things. Like adding a unit to a map, initiative list, like all this. Like I know the general shape of these, but it's all of these like miniature decisions that have been happening in between as I've just been going forward. If I bring new eyeballs onto it, new perspectives, like what's something that they might look at and be like, that's dumb how you're doing it. Try this instead. And this is a perfect example of it. Is just going ahead and trying to generalize all
definitely
rendered as an entity. So I like that.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun to learn more about the project.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna play around with Gleam before next time.
Do it. Yeah, I like it. And I think it's actually really nice. Will be really nice for like a web app, surprising, like not
Hmm.
surprisingly, because that's what like they actually want you to be building. Instead of
Yeah.
game engine is not necessarily on their like happy path for development with it. But like I think with like the types, it takes a little. There's like a little less generic. There's not functionality for like generic things. Like you can't just say something is like a renderable
Hmm.
as easily as you would normally. Like you've kind of got to. I think you got to do like a little type foo to get there. Um, but I think as seen with the entity, like there are kind of ways to do that. Um, we'll see how it
Definitely.
shapes up. I'm interested to see how you feel about it as you dig into it,
Yeah.
especially being like an Elixir fan. They are they are close but very different.
I think makes the differences stand out a lot more. But it's cool to see
Yes,
the
agreed.
different approaches.
Awesome. Cool. Appreciate it. Had fun. Thanks
Yeah.
for how you showed up.
Get back to
We
work.
will get this uploaded to YouTube. Get back to work. Which is it's funny that so Emmett hopped on one of these a little bit ago, and was just like, I just got more work listening to you scream about this than I like normally. And it's like, I don't know if that's a compliment, Emmett. Like I think you meant it as a compliment, but like it's just like, oh, okay, so like me just droning on in your ears like helped you
Wasn't engaging
focus
enough to
on something
distract you from
else.
work.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like, okay, that's okay. I'll be happy to be like the voice in the back of your head.
For sure.
Awesome.
I
All
appreciate it,
right.
man. It was good catching up.
Appreciate it, Connor. All right.
Sweet.
See ya.
I'll talk to you later. Bye.